The security features on these documents are not very easy to discern. A lot of them are secret sauce. And if you're an expert in document design and document fraud, you might know what to look for, but not everybody will. My sister in college used to check the IDs at a bar. And I'm like, what did you look for? Did you have any idea what to look for? She's like, no.
Hi, this is Technologically Speaking, the official podcast for the Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology Directorate, or S&T as we call it. Join us as we meet the science and technology experts on the front lines, keeping America safe.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Technologically Speaking. I'm your host, Brittany Greco, and I'm so excited to be joined today by Arun Vemury, our Senior Advisor for Biometrics and Identity here at S&T.
Hi, good morning.
And by John Prisby, our Lead for Biometrics and Identity.
Good morning, Brittany.
Thank you both for being here. This is a very special episode. We have two guests today. Today, we're going to be discussing identity fraud, specifically digital identity fraud, and the biometrics work that goes into ensuring that people have secure, verifiable identities. So just to kick things off, Arun, can you give us a little overview of S&T's role in this space?
Sure. Happy to do that. I guess I would start with within DHS and a lot of our DHS components, in many roles, we are responsible for helping to figure out who people are. As you can imagine as a large risk management organization, we often have to figure out, okay, if you're going into the pre-check line, are you a pre-check member, right? If you're applying for global entry, we probably need to verify your identity and figure out who you are. If you're applying for, accessing government facilities, if you are going through and applying for a real ID, the Department of Homeland Security is responsible for helping to figure out how do we vet people in these different situations, and then how do we make sure that it's really them when they show up to access different spaces. So there's a lot of work there that has to happen in order to make sure we are figuring out who people are and that we're providing the right level of access to the right individual.
And John, can you give us a little overview in this area?
Sure. The specific focus is medium to kind of long-term research. So it's not necessarily looking only at specifically what one DHS agency needs, but kind of broadly. So building off kind of what Arun said as you get to the example of aviation, that crosses Customs and Border Protection, that crosses TSA. When you get to ports of entry, that also includes Coast Guard, Maritime. There's a lot of things there. Identity is often a thread or a step along that journey. So this ability to identify who a person is for a given process, be they a trucker, someone who needs access to a secure area in an airport, a member of the traveling public. It can really depend on the role of first responder coming on scene. It's kind of taking a holistic look about how can we perform science and technology that helps our mission partners kind of in general do this, and identifying common gaps that these different specific agencies may use different words to describe the same problem.
That's something that comes up a lot when we talk to different people here at S&T, is finding efficiencies that are cross-cutting and finding solutions that have applicability across different mission spaces. And that's, a nice benefit of S&T's unique position in the department, is having that cross view to say, we see that there's a use for this in a few different cases. So let's pull that thread of risk management and talk about what some of the risks are with digital identity fraud.
I think maybe we start with what are some of the risks with identity fraud, period. Let's take a step back here, right? There's a popular cartoon where it says, like, on the internet, nobody knows you're not a dog, right?
Right.
So, that is true in a lot of different contexts. If you think about how we do identity in the United States, right, a lot of it comes back down to, I have a birth certificate, right? Well, every state has a different looking birth certificate. Those templates change all the time. It's really hard to know, if you look at somebody when they're 18 years old, and it's issued from a state that you've never been to before, how would you ever know that that's a real document? Right. So there's challenges around the existing process for identity in the United States based on legacy documents. Mm-hmm. And then when you go digital, you have a whole new set of challenges and problems that come into play. I think it's fair to say, and John and I have talked about this a lot, the identity processes in the United States weren't intentionally designed. They've kind of evolved. Why would a driver's license be the end-all be-all for how it's a license to drive a vehicle, right? It's the fact that we put a lot of people have it and we put a photograph on it. Right. And now we try to tie that photograph to a document and say, well, the state of XYZ thinks that this is a real person, so I'm going to trust it too. The challenge is they're not inherent, because it wasn't intentionally designed, it's not really necessarily secure, nor is it privacy preserving. So there are some challenges with it. And one of the things John and I work really actively to do is to think about how do we make this more secure? How do we make it more privacy protecting? And what are the different technologies or processes that might come to bear to help make it a more robust process in the future?
Yeah, and to kind of build on that, where the U.S. is, because we're these United States, we're not just sort of one single entity. So I think when I went down the rabbit hole of there's 56 states and or territories, there's over 500 tribal organizations. There's a lot of federal government agencies that issue pieces of documents that we use things for. And if there's an access control and somebody shows up with something issued by one of these organizations, they have to make a decision on, is it real? Does it match this person? Should I give this person access? And that is a really hard challenge for one person to do, especially because, kind of as Arun mentioned, these are all changing. These designs are not constant forever. Counterfeiters are seeking to be able to replicate these things. And it is a very difficult task to manage all this.
You raised a good point there about, this wasn't intentionally designed to do all the things we expect it to do right now. We can't anticipate what the needs are going to be in the future. And so trying to figure out and build this airplane as it's sort of flying in the air, how do we secure these technologies, in their physical forms, but then as we move into more digital uses for these, which we'll get to in a minute, it's a really big challenge. You mentioned the vast number of different, IDs. And, I think we've all heard cases where, somebody shows an ID from like the District of Columbia and someone's like, well, I don't know if that's necessarily a state in the US or not. A lot of the physical identification relied on human knowledge. So now as we move into that digital realm and we can say, okay, we can understand, we can have a, trusted, verified list of like, these are acceptable IDs. What do we do next? How do we take the next step of saying, okay, we know that this is an acceptable form of ID. Is it real? How do we answer the next question of verifying that this is a true documentation, a true representation of that person?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in there first. So I think one thing, yes, is the vetting process. Did this person go through some sort of rigorous vetting to make sure that they really are that person? But yeah, you raise a really good point here, which is now you have all these documents, and how do you figure out if these documents are real?
Yeah.
The security features on these documents are not very easy to discern. A lot of them are secret sauce, right? And not everybody knows how to do that. I mean, if you're an expert in document design and document fraud, you might know what to look for, but not everybody will. I find it really funny. My sister in college used to check the IDs at a bar, and I'm like, "What did you look for? Did you have any idea what to look for?" She's like, "No, I had no idea what to look for." Right, and because it's a college town, people have IDs from all over the country.
Right.
So the point is, you kind of just do your best and hope you don't get in trouble. So that's another aspect of this. It's one thing to make sure we're vetting people, we know who they are, we issue them the credential. But then it's got to be really easy for a non-expert to verify that that is actually a legitimate document and that the person bearing it actually is the person to whom it was issued. So it's one thing about making really, really secure documents. It's another thing to be like making sure it's actually usable. Because if you have a super secure document, but like a bank or a financial institution or a government agency receives it and they can't distinguish it from like the really good frauds, because there are some very good frauds that John, I'm sure, would be happy to talk about, that it really doesn't do you any good.
Yeah.
When you get to, you have your ID that you've gotten from your state or otherwise, you can use that all sorts of places.
Yeah.
You can buy age-controlled substances. You can get access. You can rent a car. There's a lot of things. So there wasn't a thought of when these things were initially put together. What are all of the places you can use it, especially online?
Oh, wow.
Like, we don't take photographs of credit cards to use them online, but we do that for IDs. And you think, okay, if you're going to take a photo of something, well, if photography is the way that you're going to decide it's real or not, and it's either a person reviewing that photo or a machine making a decision looking at that photo, unless there's been deliberate design decisions to go, well, can this be distinguished genuine or not genuine based on photographic characteristics? Or are you losing certain things like in person, like the bouncer example, it's like touch, tilt, feel. So those are things that you just tell because you can touch it. There's raised 3D print. You can maybe take an ultraviolet light and kind of do like this. There's movable features like holograms that you can kind of twist it and bend it and feel it. But if it's just a photograph, doing kind of any of those things is really challenging. And that's where I think some of the work we're looking at is how do we look at it as a design problem and think for the next generation, how do you make it where you're controlling for like cost and timeline of like, if someone has 3 seconds to make a decision to let someone through, you have to balance all these constraints. But still, I think just the core challenge is just looking at it it needs to be designed for an understanding of it's produced, where it needs to be used, and how is it fit for purpose. And that lack of that has been kind of one of the core challenges in general.
And that's probably not going to change anytime soon because, these legacy systems, people get very used to them in terms of, hey, I have a physical ID. I'm used to showing it in these situations. And people are now used to saying, well, I'll take a picture of it. I can scan it to prove, something remotely. Do you see that evolving over time into a different type of ID? Like a purely digital ID?
So I think that's actually kind of what you're seeing happen now with mobile driving licenses, which is the same way that identity is kind of following broadly where payments have gone, which is people have gotten used to the idea of using a credit or debit card or a transit pass or a ticket or airlines of it's in your Apple, Google, Samsung, third-party wallet.
Right.
You can use it. This is one more kind of thing to put in your digital wallet.
Okay.
So that's happening where I think the counts keep changing, but it's something north of like 8 million people have downloaded and are using mobile driving licenses today domestically.
Wow.
There's actually quite a bit more abroad. And I think there's 20 odd states that are actually kind of already issuing these things. So there is a movement. It is slow because we've got 56 different jurisdictions who will need to change. And historically, that has taken decades to affect kind of changes because we're not one singular entity. We are these 56 semi-sovereign areas, and it takes time for kind of any generational change like this to happen.
I want to come back to the challenge of verifying a photo of an ID. So this is top of mind for me because I'm renewing my driver's license. And so I have to send in some different documents to say, yes, this is me. I live here. Like there's all sorts of documentation and things that go into proving who you are. But we're doing that online. And we just have to trust that this email attachment is going to go to a human being, ultimately, who makes the decision of, yep, that person seems to be correct. So I guess where I'm going with this is, are there ways for technologies or different industry solutions to enter into that process to say, there's a more secure, a more verifiable way to prove that that person is who they say they are through those documents? Or are we still relying heavily on the human element to make that value judgment?
Yeah, I think a really interesting new technology, which is like the mobile driver's license. It's actually based on a couple of ISO standards, which honestly we started working on with the community maybe about like 2016 or 2017. So, even though Apple and Google have kind of recently adopted them, and honestly, they'll probably make it huge, right? It's something that a lot of the people in the industry have been working on for a very long time, including the states, right? Because they were leading the charge in helping to make these technologies and these standards. But there are some standards there that allow for the in-person usage and exchange of information using the MDL, or the general term is also called an MDoc, because it doesn't have to be just a driver's license. Theoretically, it could be a passport or another government-issued ID, or it could be a private-issued document that's stored in your wallet, and then you can share it. The intention with the standards was to make it somewhat agnostic to the kind of information you would share, but then standardize how that information is shared between what's usually called a holder, or the person to whom the document was issued, and the relying party, which might be like a bank or like a ticket, box office if you're doing something there and you're trying to prove that I really am Arun picking up my ticket, or an airline trying to get through the process there too, right, where you have to show your ID. There are standards for the in-person exchange. It's a lot like, touch where you tap your phone and you pay at the grocery store. But there are also standards for payment online. And what that will do is it'll allow certain information. There's actually this whole thing, but one of the things is, I'm blanking on the word. What's the word, John? I'm thinking about where you just share the limited information you need to share.
Selective disclosure.
Selective disclosure. So there we go. It helps to have two people on a podcast. So there's this idea that the relying party online only receives the limited information they need. Right? Like we talked about the example of the bouncer before. The bouncer doesn't need to know my address. The bouncer only needs to know that I'm over 21.
Right.
So there's actually a way to share that, hey, the state of Maryland thinks that I'm over 21, and that information is shared to the bouncer. That same thing can happen online. So it's another way to do like age proofing for people online to say like, hey, this person's over 18 or they're over 21, and they can access this age-restricted material or buy age-restricted items. right? You could also just say, I only want to share my name. I don't want to share my address, right? So you can have this selective disclosure feature and you only share the limited information versus, taking a photo of your driver's license, sharing it online and having no idea where it's going and who that organization's sharing it with.
Oh, yeah. I just went through that thrill of like, here's all my information. I hope you're a real human being on the other side of this email who's going to use this correctly to verify that I get to have this ID card.
Well, the updated thing to that meme where it says the dog, the dog sitting at a computer says on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. The new one is on the internet, nobody knows that the bank is not really a dog, right? Because you can pretend to be anybody else, right? So that's the other part of this is, are you actually interacting with who you think you are? And by using some of these new technologies, one of the things we're hoping to do is that you can mutually authenticate the other party. Yeah. That I really am Arun, you really are Brittany, and we're actually exchanging information between ourselves, not somebody who's pretending to be Brittany.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, we're just kind of at the dawn of what's possible, because when you think, one of the challenges like PDF is people thought, okay, it's digital paper.
Right.
But they brought the mindset and the constraints of everything with physical paper. But when you make something digital, it's not the same thing. It's a version of the same thing. So when you think about this, it is a document. So it's just a container you can put information in. And there's already doing this for educational things. So like certificates, degrees, you can prove there's like concepts of like smart resumes, where it's not that someone's lying on the resume to say, I actually got a degree from Omega University and I didn't. They can actually cryptographically sign it that you went there.
Wow.
You can use this for healthcare. You can use this for ID docs. There's actually other sort of S&T work around like supply chain credentials, because you can prove not just facts about humans, but you can prove facts about software. You can prove facts about logistics, facts about things. Because it's, in general, there's documentation, be it like shipping manifests, software manifests. These terms usually came from physical industries. They're being reused. And you get to, well, the nice thing is you save time, because if you can, it's the lack of digital trust. And if you can trust the information, because it's in machine readable format, you can actually just automatically pull it in. You don't have to have somebody type it. And you don't have to check it with another party, because it's already been signed by the group that issued it. And we're sort of early stages, but when you get to, well, is it an agent acting on your behalf as an AI agent? How do you know that you genuinely authorized it for this thing? We're very early in sort of the standards or adoption or what's possible. But as we start to let digital representations of ourselves do more that may become more autonomous over time, you're still going to need that level of trust.
This might be a little rabbit hole. But so, there's something in the news right now when we're recording this episode about a social media platform requiring photo ID for users to verify their age. And there's a big pushback because there's a bunch of privacy concerns and there's a bunch of security concerns, because as we all know, hacks happen and this information gets out on the internet all the time. What are your thoughts on this, about the tension between we need to have secure, verifiable ways to prove who you are, to, let's say, protect minors, online, but also the inherent risks of putting any information on the internet where bad actors are just going to go try and swipe it up as much as they can?
I can jump on this first, right? Like, I think there has been, and there probably ought to still be, a range of types of transactions. Like, I should still be able to go to, the 7-Eleven down the street and buy a newspaper and not have to share all of my personal identity information with the cashier in order to buy it. Right. So I think the idea that, based on there are different types of transaction and maybe different levels of information that are relevant to share under those use cases. I think the danger is that, some organizations will try to take as much information as they can all the time.
Yeah.
I'm sure we've all clicked on those terms and conditions online and we're like, I don't even know what I just signed away, but I'm sure I signed away a lot of information. But the idea here is there could be a range, and we want to make sure the technology could support having a range of information that's shared. The other challenge is, like, to your point, you kind of mentioned it, like, once these things are digitized, it's really hard to know, like, where else it's gone, because it's cheap to send and share information online. And you don't always know, like, where it's going to be saved or used or accessed, or who might also be able to access that information once you relinquish control. So these are some legitimate concerns that, I think we have. And I think the idea that now that we're sharing identity information online, it's somehow worse, I think it's already kind of not great because we are sharing our photographs of our IDs and other information online, and it could be compromised under different circumstances.
Yeah, and I think adding maybe specifically to the technology, that's where you get to selective disclosure, privacy enhancing. There is the promise of being able to do this in more selective ways where the information is just not shared. So you can have like a zero knowledge proof or others where you are proving something is true without necessarily revealing the underlying information about it.
Oh, that's interesting.
So there's different mechanisms where you can share things, and what is stored or what is available to be stored is not the full set of person identifiable information.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of this is similar to where payments have already done this. So chip and PIN or Apple, Google, Samsung, other pay, it generates a one-time use code. So even if there's a data breach and those are taken, because they've already been used, they're no longer useful and they're not necessarily reversible to the person, the merchant, the others.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say we're earlier in the large-scale adoption of this and figuring out kind of what are the right technical approaches that can kind of balance these things.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to look at an example of where it has gone before, payments is sort of useful in a number of ways, this being one.
That's an interesting use case. And that brings this my question back to, we talked about S&T's role in this space and the idea of building these standards and putting in, security by design. So who is S&T working with in this space to solve these problems or at least answer the questions to the best of our ability?
Yeah, so I think we'll mention a couple different things. So John and I work with a variety of different stakeholders on this because it is a big problem, right? It's not something like this is purely a DHS mission. It's actually every agency that deals with different people and the public, which is pretty much all of them.
It's a lot of them, yeah.
Yeah, we all have these common set of problems, right? And fundamentally, like a lot of the work that we do is like DHS does have, like within TSA, they have the Real ID program office, right? So we work with them. We work with the National Institute of Standards and Technology. We work with them and engage with standards development organizations like ISO, the International Organization for Standards. These different organizations, and then through that process, lots of other, not only U.S., but also international agencies, organizations participate in the development of these standards to hopefully make sure it's useful across different use cases. Mm-hmm. Because it would be awful if we all developed different technologies and different standards and none of them talk to each other. Ugh. Then we kind of defeated the problem, right? Defeated the purpose, right? The whole point here is we're trying to create documents that are secure, trustworthy, and reliable for various stakeholders. So that my payment, I think, John, payment is a great example. I can go to almost any country in the world, tap my credit card, and my payment will go through. Mm-hmm. We would want to have that same level of trust with identity information, right? So you can prove who you are wherever you might be.
So thinking about how we test and evaluate technologies, because that is a big part of what we do here at S&T. So can you give us a little overview of some of the recent test and evaluation efforts that have been conducted?
Sure. So over the last couple of years, we've done things around both mobile driver's licenses and MDoc type documents, testing that they interoperate, they work with the standard. We can read documents issued by different providers on using different wallets, different handsets. But we've also done work looking at the online identity proving process. We have a series of challenges we call the acronym. It's a bit of a mouthful. Remote identity validation. So we did a remote identity validation tech demo and a remote identity validation rally. For most people, they will not care what the difference is between them. But the point is we realized that everybody is starting to use these technologies to take a photo of your driver's license or an ID document and take a selfie and to submit it online. How well do these things actually work? Can I really tell that a document is real or fake from the smartphone photo, as John mentioned earlier in the call? Like a lot of the security features are, infrared light based or UV ultraviolet based, right? These things that you see only under certain wavelengths of light. You're not going to get that in a smartphone photo, right? Micro printing where you need to have like a magnifying glass focusing on certain, you're not going to see that in a smart. So are the features actually available for verification or authentication when you are relying upon using a smartphone? Right. So that's one of the challenges. Another one is if I take a selfie, can I tell that was actually a real person or did I just download your profile photo or did I take a photo of a photo? or a photo of someone wearing a mask. Like we talk about, we often joke about like Mission Impossible style masks, right? But some of these masks are really good, right? And they're a lot easier to make than they used to be. And then the other question is, does the photo actually match or appear to be the person to whom the document was issued? Does the photo on the document match the photo on the face? Because the photos on the document can be really small, right? Or they're grayscale, or they might be a profile. Can we actually verify that that's actually the same person? So we're evaluating those different technologies. We're looking at maybe expanding that to new additional sets of technologies in this next coming year. But we wanted to really kick the tires on them and start to figure out what are the right performance measures and how well do these technologies actually work, where frauds are being detected, but then also real users are not being adversely impacted and they're being able to access the products or services they're trying to reach.
And I think we take for granted sometimes the idea that we can envision like one or two people trying to do something bad, but there are criminal organizations out there that are very intentionally trying to, commit this fraud for very nefarious purposes. I think one of the main concerns that I have coming to this conversation is how AI makes this harder. I think we've touched on it a little bit before about, you can generate an image of somebody, but, as AI has become more accessible, more cost-effective, how is that affecting the development of these technologies and our ability to, detect fraud?
So I think it's interesting you brought up, I'll call it just the scale problem as well as kind of Arun did, because one of the issues we've kind of probably all experienced is, I would imagine probably in the last week or month, you've gotten one or more scam texts or calls.
Yeah.
And part of that is because when the phone system was built, decades ago, the assumption was like, look, you had AT&T and a small number of operators who were operating in good faith. So it was really good at moving information, but there wasn't a ton of security built in to make sure that the handset that you're connecting to, there's mutual authentication.
Right.
So the same set of principles that kind of underpin creating a digital version of a driving license, there's actually active work right now to do that with phone calls, do that with text messages, because you take the concept of like a business wallet where you would like to be sure that if you're being contacted by a company or a DHS agency, that it is genuinely them, somebody from that organization contacting you. And on their end, it would ideally be like, well, can they be sure that you're you? This stuff is becoming trivial. And there is a generalized lack of trust on any internet thing, which includes online, mobile, social media, WhatsApp, text message, and it's all networked. There are principles and there are efforts to sort of restore trust by being able to selectively disclose and yet cryptographically chain together trust. These efforts are still, I'd say, like very young and often sometimes very like specific to a use case or to a sector. But there is promise, because the challenge with AI is it makes the ability to create inauthentic content much easier and much cheaper and require much less skill than it did prior to this. So
basically, in the 90s or earlier, there was usually a developer or designer or programmer who was looking at specific features, right? And these were, we would call it today like handcrafted features that they were trying to look into and try to measure. And figure out, okay, let's figure out all these different measurements. And the common examples might be like the distance between the eyes or the distance between the ears or the distance between the ear and the mouth or the edge of the nose and come up with what do I think? So a person would try to figure out here's what I think the unique or salient features of the face are. And here's how I would measure it. And they would try to do that and they would try to figure out, try to make it as unique as possible. So that you could, have relatively... So if you had a lot of people's faces, you could basically find the right face instead of getting a false match and finding the wrong person. What happened with machine learning totally changed the game, right? And I think we didn't know it until it started happening, where we started testing these. S&T was working on a variety of different projects, and we were looking at fingerprints, face recognition, iris recognition, a lot of different technologies to see if it could solve certain problems. And then, honestly, back then it was like, oh, fingerprints are like the gold standard. Iris is kind of up and coming technology that could be just as good as fingerprints. And face was like the lagging, third stepchild here. Machine learning changed everything. It was a combination of people learned how to use machine learning and use the kind of hardware that came out to make that faster. There was a huge amount of data that researchers were building upon because everybody takes photos of themselves and puts it on the internet. So these researchers were pulling all those faces and training all their tools on these faces. And basically, these machine learning models were finding new sets of characteristics to measure that maybe were not envisioned by a human, that this would not be the same as what a human being envisioned.
Okay.
Right. It was also able to look at these imperfect faces, like, so not these frontal photos that you get in like a passport. You get these side photos, you get people wearing glasses and hats, really bad lighting. And it figured out how to get past a lot of those like challenges that a human being would say, like, oh, that's not a good photo. Well, the models figured out how to pull out some of those salient features and still match them. I mean, several years ago at this point, we reached the point where it was the tools, the machine learning models are basically are superior to human beings at matching faces, both in terms of like going through a lot of the different faces and finding the right one. Wow. When we measure the accuracy of these technologies, it's at fractions of a percent now. Which is far better than the average human being or that bouncer at the bar trying to figure out if this is the real person to whom the ID was issued.
Is that the technology that we sometimes see? Like, I went on a vacation, I come back into the country, and I can, take a quick selfie, and it's like, yeah, you're good to go. Is that sort of the matching technology where it's looking at a passport?
It's the same technology.
Okay.
Yeah. So a lot of times, there's a variety of different tools that people might be using, but you usually with facial recognition, it falls into a couple of different categories. One is like what we call a one-to-one comparison, where I've got like a passport photo and I'm trying to say, like, is this person the same photo in the passport? Right. Another example might be like one of the use cases that exist right now is for people boarding a flight, an international flight. CBP is required by law to do this thing called biometric exit to verify the departure of foreign nationals leaving the country. So what they do is they say, well, here are the people who we expect to be boarding that flight. They set up a local, basically a small system, do a one-to-few, so maybe 300 people. So as a passenger approaches the boarding area, their photo is collected. They're compared against the 300 people expected to be on that flight. And then it does that we used to say one to many. Now we say one to some, because it's very different to do a gallery of the size of like 300 versus like 100 million. Yeah. Right. So to try to talk about that scale. So that's another type of problem that they would look at is, can I figure out if this person is one of the people we expect to see today?
So looking ahead, what is the next big advancement, the next big step, the next big innovation that you're anticipating in this field?
I think it's going to be really interesting to see if there's been a concept, variously called like Web3. Others were kind of the missing part is the identity layer. And with this change to where increasingly, internet traffic or internet content or other is AI-based, and it's where you can't necessarily, not only can you not know that it's a dog, but now it's really good at simulating that dog is really good at simulating a person. Looking of how do we communicate and maintain trust, and how does these concepts of cryptographic verification, selective disclosure, use of where you can delegate authority to another person, like power of attorney is an old example.
Yeah.
Is actual John responsible for the behavior of his agent? This is really new territory that is very untrod. And I think it's just going to be a really fascinating time to kind of see as this evolves, where, there's where we think it's going to go, there's where the technology will progress, and then there's like the guardrails and things will keep up. And then there's also the legal frameworks that go, well, the law says X, Y, or Z. An example of, I think one of the first things was, there was a question of well, can an AI model be an inventor? And this is just I think the beginning of these kinds of things.
You're really opening up a really interesting line of inquiry about, agency and responsibility and accountability, and how we make sure that we think through all those things when we, set this technology out into the world. Arun and John, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Technologically Speaking. To learn more about what you've heard in this episode, check out the show notes on our website and follow us on Apple Podcasts and YouTube. And on social media at DHS SciTech. That's DHS SCITECH. Bye.